When I first moved into my cozy townhouse, I felt a surge of excitement. It was nestled in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets, and the sound of birds chirping in the morning made it feel like a little oasis away from the bustling city. I had spent weeks packing, signing paperwork, and imagining how I would decorate my new space. It was my fresh start, and I couldn't wait to make it feel like home. The first week was a whirlwind of unpacking boxes and meeting my neighbors. Most of them were friendly and welcoming. Mrs. Nguyen from 2 doors down brought over homemade spring rolls, and Mr. Johnson offered to help me set up my Wi-Fi. These small gestures made me feel part of the community. However, not everyone seemed pleased to see a new face. Patricia, my next-door neighbor, stood out. I first noticed her on the day I moved in. While I was struggling with a heavy box, I caught her staring from her front window, her face partially hidden behind the curtain. I smiled and gave a small wave, but she didn't respond. I brushed it off, thinking she might just be shy or having a bad day. A few days later, I finally met her in person. I was watering my small garden when she approached me. She was a woman in her 60s, with short, curly gray hair and a frown that seemed almost permanent. She introduced herself as Patricia, and I was eager to make a good impression. I told her how nice the neighborhood seemed, but she cut me off to tell me my garden hose was too close to the sidewalk. Her tone was sharp, and I felt a little taken aback. From that moment on, our interactions remained awkward. Whenever I saw her, I felt a subtle tension in the air. She always seemed to have something to complain about. Whether it was my trash can being an inch out of place or my car being parked too close to the line, Patricia made sure I knew about it. Still, I tried to stay polite and patient, hoping that, over time, things would improve. Little did I know, Patricia's behavior was just the beginning. What started as small annoyances would soon grow into a much bigger problem, one that would challenge my peace and comfort in my new home. As weeks went by, Patricia's behavior became more unsettling. At first, it was just her constant complaints. My recycling bin was too full, my music was too loud, even when I wore headphones, and my porch light was too bright. I tried to accommodate her requests, adjusting and double-checking everything. I wanted to keep the peace, but nothing seemed good enough for her. Then, things started to escalate. One morning, I found my garden hose cut in half. It lay there, limp and useless. I couldn't imagine who would do such a thing, but when I saw Patricia glaring at me from her window, a shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to confront her, but I didn't have proof. I decided to let it go, hoping it was just a random act of mischief. But it didn't stop there. I began finding strange notes on my door. Sloppily written on scraps of paper, they read things like, "Keep your trash where it belongs," or "This isn't your home." Each time, I felt a mix of fear and frustration. I mentioned it to a few neighbors, but no one else had experienced anything similar. Some even suggested I might be overreacting. One evening, I came home late from work and noticed my front yard lights were off. I had set them on a timer, so it was strange. When I checked, the power cord had been yanked out and damaged. My hands trembled as I plugged it back in, and a part of me began to feel genuinely unsafe. I tried to avoid Patricia, but every time I stepped outside, she seemed to be there, watching. Her presence became a dark cloud over my daily life. I found myself rushing to and from my car, avoiding eye contact, and keeping my blinds closed. Despite everything, I didn't want to assume the worst. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe she was just an unhappy person. But the more incidents occurred, the harder it became to believe that everything was just in my head. Something was very, very wrong. Things took a darker turn one chilly evening when I returned home to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I pushed it open, the hinges creaking in the silence. The living room was a mess, cushions thrown on the floor, picture frames tilted, and the contents of my desk scattered everywhere. My immediate thought was a break-in, but nothing valuable seemed to be missing. I called the police, and they arrived quickly. They examined the scene, asked questions, and took notes. When I mentioned my suspicions about Patricia, the officer's expression turned skeptical. "Do you have any evidence?" he asked. I didn't. I only had a gut feeling and a series of unsettling encounters. They told me to install security cameras and left, their footsteps echoing in the empty street. Determined to protect myself, I bought a set of cameras the next day. I placed them around my home, hoping they'd give me the peace of mind I desperately needed. For a few days, nothing happened. I almost convinced myself that I had overreacted, that maybe I was being paranoid. Then, one night, my phone buzzed with a notification from the camera app. I opened it and watched the live feed. The grainy night vision showed a figure moving in my yard. It was Patricia. She wore a dark hoodie, the hood pulled low over her face, but there was no mistaking her hunched posture and slow, deliberate movements. She was tampering with my garden, pulling up flowers and tossing them aside. A surge of anger and fear shot through me. I called the police again, showing them the footage when they arrived. This time, they took me seriously. They went to Patricia's door, and after a tense conversation, she was led away in handcuffs. As they took her to the car, she turned and looked at me. Her expression was a mix of fury and something else, something that made my skin crawl. I thought catching her would bring relief, but all I felt was a deep, unsettling sense that this wasn't over. Not yet. In the days following Patricia's arrest, a strange calm settled over my home. I cleaned up the mess in the garden, replanting flowers and repairing the damage. The police assured me that Patricia would face charges for trespassing and vandalism. I thought I could finally breathe again, but a lingering unease clung to me. One afternoon, I received a call from the detective handling my case. He informed me that Patricia had been released on bail. My heart sank. "She has a restraining order," he assured me. "If she comes near you, call us immediately." His words were meant to comfort me, but they only heightened my anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia's obsession wasn't over. I took extra precautions, changing my locks, updating my security system, and even asking neighbors to keep an eye out. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow that passed by my window, sent my mind spiraling. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard a tapping sound. Soft, rhythmic, and coming from the window. I sat up, my pulse racing. The cameras hadn't triggered any alerts, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. There, standing just beyond the fence, was Patricia. Her face was expressionless, her hands hanging limply at her sides. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring at my window. I stumbled backward, my mind scrambling for what to do. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. By the time the police arrived, Patricia was gone. They searched the area, but found nothing. The officers suggested I stay with a friend or family member, but I had nowhere else to go. I felt trapped, my own home no longer a sanctuary but a cage. I couldn't live like this. Something had to change. I knew I needed to take control, to find a way to end this nightmare before it consumed me completely. The night Patricia reappeared was a turning point. I couldn't keep living in fear, waiting for the next knock or shadow. The police could only do so much, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. I installed more security cameras, this time with motion sensors and floodlights. I reinforced the windows and added a second lock to every door. I even signed up for self-defense classes. Each step I took made me feel a little stronger, a little more in control. I also reached out to a lawyer. He helped me file for a stronger restraining order, presenting all the evidence of Patricia's harassment. The legal process was slow and exhausting, but I knew it was necessary. I needed a paper trail, something official to hold on to. The hardest part was trying to reclaim my peace of mind. I forced myself to return to my routine, gardening, reading, inviting friends over. I wouldn't let Patricia take away my life, no matter how unsettled I felt. Weeks passed without a sign of her. The police kept me updated, and I learned that Patricia had been admitted to a mental health facility for evaluation. Relief washed over me. She was getting help, and I finally had room to breathe. For the first time in months, I slept with the windows open, letting the cool night air fill my room. I still double-checked the locks and glanced over my shoulder, but the fear no longer controlled me. Taking action had given me back my life. I knew the road to healing wasn't over, but I had taken the first steps, and that was enough. With Patricia in a mental health facility, my life began to return to normal. The sense of safety that had once felt so far away started to settle back into my home. I embraced simple joys, reading on my porch, tending to my garden, and sharing coffee with friends. Each day felt like a small victory. Therapy helped me process everything. I learned how to manage the lingering anxiety and the moments when shadows seemed too close. My therapist encouraged me to reclaim my space, not just physically but emotionally. So, I redecorated my home, painting walls with warm colors and filling rooms with fresh flowers. It was my way of turning the page. One afternoon, I received a letter from Patricia's care facility. She had started therapy and wanted to apologize. My first instinct was fear, but I also felt an unexpected sense of closure. I didn't respond, but knowing she was getting help made it easier to move on. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about letting Patricia back into my life, but about freeing myself from the grip of the past. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but bit by bit, I let go of the fear and anger. I also became involved in a support group for others who had experienced stalking. Sharing my story and listening to others helped me see how far I had come. It was empowering to offer hope to those still in the thick of it. Looking back, I saw strength where I once only saw vulnerability. I had faced my nightmare and found a way through it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace. With time, my life began to bloom in ways I hadn't thought possible. The shadows of the past had faded, and in their place was a newfound sense of strength and resilience. I started venturing out more, meeting new people, and even joining a local book club. It felt good to share space with others without constantly looking over my shoulder. One crisp morning, as I walked through the park, I noticed a small community event. People were setting up booths for local businesses and mental health organizations. Drawn by curiosity, I approached a table with a sign that read, "Healing Through Art." The organizer, a woman named Sarah, invited me to join their weekly sessions where survivors of trauma could express themselves through creative outlets. It was the perfect opportunity. I began attending the sessions, using painting as a way to process lingering emotions. With each brushstroke, I felt lighter. The group became a safe space where I could share my story without fear of judgment. Many of us had walked through different kinds of darkness, but our shared journey toward healing created a powerful bond. As months went by, I found myself becoming an advocate for mental health awareness. I volunteered to speak at events, sharing my experience with stalking and the importance of seeking help. It was terrifying at first, but with every story I told, I felt my past losing its power over me. One evening, after giving a talk, a young woman approached me. Her eyes were filled with gratitude as she shared her own struggle with a similar experience. She told me my story had given her hope that if I could find peace, so could she. Her words were a reminder of how far I had come, not just surviving, but thriving. Life had a new rhythm, one not dictated by fear, but by purpose and joy. I continued therapy, stayed connected to my support group, and nurtured new friendships. The past was part of my story, but it no longer defined me. I had reclaimed my life, turning pain into strength and fear into freedom. And with every step forward, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. A year had passed since I first joined the art therapy group. My life had blossomed into something I never thought possible. The weight of my past had lightened, and my days were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. I continued my advocacy work, speaking at events and sharing my story, not just as a survivor, but as someone who had truly healed. One day, Sarah, the organizer of the art therapy group, approached me with an idea. She wanted me to co-lead a new series of workshops specifically for those struggling with fear and anxiety after traumatic experiences. At first, I hesitated. Could I really guide others when my own journey had been so messy and uncertain? But deep down, I knew this was the next step. It was a chance to give back what had been so generously given to me. Our first workshop had a small turnout, just 5 people, but the room was filled with bravery. Each person shared their story through paint, poetry, and quiet conversation. As I walked around, offering encouragement and a listening ear, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. It was a beautiful reminder of how healing could spread like ripples in water, touching lives in ways we might never fully see. One afternoon, as we wrapped up a session, a young man named David stayed behind. His painting was a chaotic swirl of dark colors, but in the center was a small, bright dot of yellow. He explained that it symbolized hope, the tiny part of him that still believed things could get better. His honesty moved me, and I shared with him how I, too, had once clung to a small spark in the darkness. Our workshops grew, both in size and impact. People started bringing friends, and word spread throughout the community. It became more than just a class. It was a sanctuary where vulnerability was met with compassion. And with every story shared, every brushstroke made, healing took root. Looking back, I realized my journey had come full circle. What began as a quest to find safety had turned into a mission to create it for others. The darkness I had walked through had not been in vain. It had led me here, to this room full of color, courage, and connection. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and hope. I truly believe that sharing our stories and supporting one another can bring light into the darkest places. If this story touched your heart or inspired you, please consider subscribing to our channel. By doing so, you'll stay connected with more stories, resources, and encouragement to help you or someone you love find strength and healing. Your support means a lot and allows us to continue creating content that uplifts and empowers. Don't forget to like, share, and comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. Above all, I wish you good health, peace, and joy in every step of your journey. Remember, no matter what you're going through, you are not alone. We're here for you, and brighter days are ahead. Take care and be blessed.